Afternoon and welcome to the TCEQ's Industrial and Hazardous Waste Rule Update webinar. My name is Stephanie Lindgren and I will be your moderator today. Please take a moment to click on the attendance form link in the live event Q&A on the right-hand side of the screen and fill it in. If you do not see the Q&A, you can turn it on by clicking the question mark icon on the top right of the screen. By filling this attendance form, it helps us continue to put on these webinars and provide this useful information. Only our presenters will be able to speak at today's webinar. So if you have any questions regarding problems with this webinar, please email us at texasenvirohelp@tceq.texas.gov. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the Q&A and we will try to respond to them as quick as possible. And for any additional questions about the waste rules, please email ihwper@tceq.texas.gov. We have one presenter today, Kristen Finetti, with our Small Business and Local Government Assistance section. And to help answer your questions during the Q&A, we have Lindy Dietrich and Andy Windham with our IHW Registration and Reporting Department, as well as Martin Torres and Sarah Schreier with our IHW Permits Department. We will take one 10-minute break during this presentation and will remain online during the break to respond to some of the questions in the Q&A. If you would like to follow along with the presentation, I have posted a link that will take you to the PowerPoint slides. That link can be found in the Q&A. And now I will turn the mic over to Kristen. Take it away, Kristen.
Hi, thanks everyone for joining us today. Like Stephanie said, my name's Kristen Finetti, and I work for the TCEQ in our DFW office in the Small Business and Local Government Assistance Program. I'm a compliance specialist, and I'll be presenting today. I've worked for the TCEQ for 8 years, and I spent my first 2.5 years as a waste investigator in the DFW region before moving over to small business. Today, I'm going to be talking about the new industrial and hazardous waste rules. All right, just to give you an overview of the different topics we're going to talk about today, we're going to spend the most time on the generator improvement rule. We're also going to talk about the program I'm in and the different resources we provide. And we'll also talk about the rule adoption process. All right, just to give you some background on how we made it here. So the hazardous waste regulatory program, TCEQ, we get our authorization from the Environmental Protection Agency, and the rule that is on the hazardous waste program, RCRA, or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, was passed by U.S. Congress in 1975, and then Texas received our authorization in 1984. So the rule package and changes that we're going to be talking about today are one of the largest changes in Texas's history of hazardous waste rules. That's why we're taking some time today to go over these requirements with you. All right, so in 2017, EPA issued the final rule for the hazardous waste generator program changes. Sometimes that's called the generator improvement rule. Then in 2019, EPA issued the final rule for the Pharmaceutical Hazardous Waste Program. We're not going to focus on that too much today. We'll talk about it briefly, but here in Texas, in order to maintain our RCRA authorization, we have to adopt those more stringent rules. So here in Texas, we decided to put those two rule packages together, the generator improvement rules and the pharmaceutical rules, along with a couple of other changes that we needed to make. That big rule package is commonly referred to as the Phase 2 RCRA rule package, or just the RCRA rule package. So our RCRA rule package became effective February 3rd of 2022. Okay, so the Phase 2 RCRA rule package includes a lot of different provisions. So the generator improvement rules, which is what we're going to focus on for the most part during this presentation. We also incorporated into this Phase 2 RCRA rule package the pharmaceutical rule for healthcare facilities. We also added aerosol cans as a type of universal waste. We also made revisions to the definition of solid waste. And then we also included an update and formalized existing guidance regarding the regulatory status of spent boundary sand from the iron and steel casting industry. So all of these changes together make up the Phase 2 RCRA rule package. All right, so we're going to focus on the generator rule, the generator improvement rule package. The first part we're going to talk about are some more kind of clerical changes that were made, and then we'll move on into more of the requirements. So the generator improvement rule included some new definitions. One change that was made was instead of referring to the smallest level of generator as very small quantity generator, or sorry, instead of referring to them as conditionally exempt small quantity generators, we now refer to them as very small quantity generators. So the amounts of waste didn't change, it's just the name. So now the lowest level of generator will be called very small quantity generator, or vsquig. They also added some definitions for terms like central accumulation area and created a formal definition for acute hazardous waste. A lot of the changes were just clarifications or formalizing existing guidance into the rules. The rules were also reorganized to, at least on the federal side, to make it a little bit easier and more user-friendly to understand which requirements apply to which facilities. So you didn't have to do as much looking in between different rules. So this chart goes over for the federal rules, kind of the old citation for different requirements and then the new citation. So you can see it's a little bit more organized. And, I will say for TCQs, in our rules, we do a lot of cross-referencing of the EPA rules. So we're not including the TCQ citations here. Just once you get into the EPA rules, they reorganize it so it's a little bit easier to understand. Okay, so these rules, they don't change anything about doing a hazardous waste determination. They don't add any additional requirements as part of that process. They just provide some more guidance and explanation on how to properly do a waste determination and why it's so important to conduct an accurate waste determination. Waste determinations, they're the bedrock of the hazardous waste rules. This is something a lot of facilities unfortunately do incorrectly. So this might be just a good reminder for you to go back and look at all your waste determinations, make sure they were done accurately, and make sure that you have enough documentation to back up why you determined waste was hazardous or non-hazardous. All right, the new rules provide some clarification of all the different waste generation scenarios a facility can have and what their generator status would be for that scenario. So the new waste counting guidance takes into account facilities who generate acute hazardous waste and how that can affect a facility's generator status. Just as a reminder, acute hazardous waste is P-listed waste, such as cyanides, which are considered especially harmful, even in small quantities. I will say most businesses rarely generate acute hazardous waste. P-listed wastes are products that may have exceeded their shelf life and can no longer be used for their intended purpose. So therefore, you generate a acute P-listed waste if you discard it before using it. So if you aren't sure, if the waste you're generating is P-listed, feel free to reach out to us and we can provide you some more information. But if you do generate acute hazardous waste now, it's a little bit clearer in the rules what your generator status is. Now here in Texas, we do require industrial facilities to further classify their non-hazardous waste. So this table also takes into account facilities who generate class 1 waste, which is the most toxic of the non-hazardous industrial waste types. All right, so those are all the kind of clerical things that were incorporated in the new rule, and now we're going to focus more on the requirements in the rule that are conditional. These requirements have a lot of benefits to facilities who take advantage of them. So you don't have to take advantage of these requirements, but if you do choose to take advantage of these requirements, you will have to meet all of the conditions of the rule. All right, so first we're going to go over episodic generation. So we're going to talk about facilities who are registered episodic generators, then unregistered, and then we're going to talk about the requirements that apply to both facilities, whether you're registered or unregistered. So episodic generation, those are facilities who fluctuate between generator status categories. Previously, if you were a registered generator and you started generating more waste for a month, you had to move to that higher level of generator status while you were holding that waste. And then you could switch back to a lower level once the waste was off-site. But it did create a lot of confusion because for that month you would have to meet all of these additional requirements. So it got a little confusing for facilities about what paperwork they had to maintain during which months. So now the new rules allow registered generators a more organized and streamlined system to manage that episodic waste and then move back to their typical level. So for registered episodic generation, these are facilities who already have who are already registered with the TCEQ as a generator, but then they have an event that causes them to move up in generator status. So we have a notification form that's new that these facilities will use, and it's that TCEQ form 20940. So in the past, for unregistered episodic waste, we had a program that was called one-time shipment. Now that's going to be called unregistered episodic waste generation. So these are for generators who do not have an active solid waste registration and normally would not require one. So this program gives facilities a temporary Texas registration number, temporary Texas waste codes, and if necessary, a temporary EPA ID number. So this is not an option for registered generators. This is only for unregistered. And these facilities would use TCEQ form 00757 to notify us of this activity. All right, so now in these next slides, we're going to go over the requirements for both registered and unregistered episodic generators. So under the episodic rules, you're allowed one episodic event per year, and then you have the opportunity to petition TCEQ for a second event. So you can have two different types of events. You can have an unplanned event. That could be like if you have like a storm, damage some equipment, or a product recall, that could be an unplanned event. While a planned event would be maybe a clean out of a tank or a clean out of a laboratory or something like that. So in total, you're allowed to have one unplanned and then one planned event per year. So you cannot have two unplanned events per year. Okay, so if you have an episodic event, you need to maintain some records. You need to keep records of the beginning and end dates of the episodic event, a description of the episodic event, the types and quantities of hazardous waste that you generated during the event, and then you need to keep the name of the transporter and the final destination facility where the waste was taken to ultimately for disposal. Then if you petition the TCEQ for more than one episodic event, you need to keep that approval letter if you receive approval for that petition. All right, so for planned events, you need to notify TCEQ 30 days prior to the episodic event. Then for unplanned events, you need to notify TCEQ within 72 hours after the event. The site will have 60 days after the waste generation event to ship the waste offsite. And then this is where those forms that I was talking about would come into play of how you notify TCEQ. So one form for registered generators and then another form for unregistered generators. All right, so while the episodic waste is on site, you will need to label the containers with the words episodic waste. And then you'll need to label them with the date that the episodic event began. You'll also need to identify an emergency coordinator, someone who the TCEQ could contact if there's an emergency event. You'll need to use a hazardous waste manifest when you ship the waste off-site for disposal. And then you'll need to maintain all the records related to the episodic event. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next provision or conditional requirement in the new rules, which is vsquig waste consolidation. So this is where very small quantity generators can send their hazardous waste to a large quantity generator who's owned by the same person. So in the rules, there is a definition of person, which includes, can be identified as an individual, a trust, a firm, a joint stock company, a federal agency, a corporation, or association. There is also a definition of control in the rules as well, which comes into play as being a facility that's under control of the same, under control by the same person. So control means the power to direct the policies of the generator, whether by ownership or stock, or by voting rights. So if you have any questions about kind of getting into the nitty-gritty about the definition of person or control, you can find those full definitions in the rules, and then you can always reach out to us as well. But anyways, this rule was created because in the past, under the old rules, if a very small quantity generator wanted to send their waste to an LQG, the LQG had to have an IHW permit to accept that waste, which an IHW permit is a very extensive and expensive process. And so this is to make sure that the waste from the very small quantity generator is still being handled properly. The LQG has the most requirements, and so they know how to handle waste, and it has to be sent to a treatment, storage, and disposal facility. So instead of the very small quantity generator sending their waste and managing it all the way through disposal, the LQG kind of takes over and has the experience of managing the waste. And then also very small quantity generators can send their waste to a type 1 landfill as a special waste. And so having this provision in place allows that waste to actually be taken to a TSDF by the LQG. So the waste is ultimately being managed in the most environmentally safe way. And so it's kind of a win for everyone. So for the very small quantity generator who's going to participate and send their waste to an LQG under control of the same person, the very small quantity generator will need to label the waste containers with the words hazardous waste and the hazards, which we'll talk about labeling containers with hazards a little bit later. But the very small quantity generator is not required to use a registered transporter or a uniform waste manifest for this type of waste. For the LQG who's participating and accepting that very small quantity generator waste, they will need to update their registration. They'll submit parts G and I of the notification of hazardous and industrial waste form. They'll need to report the very small quantity generator waste on their annual waste summary. They'll need to label the very small quantity generator waste with the date the waste was received. They'll need to assign a waste code to the vsquig waste and then add it to the LQG's notice of registration. And then the LQG will need to maintain records of shipment for 3 years. So the shipment records must identify the name, site address, and contact information for the vsquig, and include a description of the hazardous waste received, including the quantity and the date the waste was received. All right, so another requirement that's out there for facilities or for LQGs is this waiver to the 50-foot requirement. So previously, a large quantity generator could not store ignitable or reactive waste within 50 feet of the property line. Now, under the new rules, there's an option to get a waiver from that requirement if the local fire marshal agrees that storing the waste within 50 feet of the property line is appropriate and safe. So you have to have something in writing from whoever has authority over the fire code that they are okay with you storing it that close to the property line. All right, so we finished that part of the presentation. We'll do questions, but I guess before we started with that, wanted to take a 1-minute break so that you can fill out the attendee form. So they'll post a link in the chat to that form if you haven't filled it out, and we'll just take a minute for y'all to fill that out. And then if you have any questions, feel free to type those into the chat and we'll take some time to answer those.
Okay, so it looks like we have one question right now. The question asks, what would qualify as a planned event?
This is Andy. I'm gonna take a look at the form real quick, but there's a list of items that are generally considered a planned event on the notification forms for episodic generation. Off the top of my head, I believe tank cleanouts are considered a planned event. I think expired chemicals would fall under a planned event. Sorry, I'm still trying to find the form here. Let's see here. So we've got equipment maintenance during plant shutdowns, excess chemical inventory removal, short-term construction or demolition, tank cleanouts, and then there's an option for other. Pretty much if you can anticipate the waste generation event, it should be considered a planned event and you should notify 30 days in advance.
Great, thank you, Andy. The next question is, how does a vsquig shipping waste to a large quantity generator actually help? Can it prevent the vsquig from changing status?
It doesn't affect the vsquig status. They could still bump into SQG or LQG and then either need to do an episodic notification or register. What the intent of the consolidation is to ensure that vsquig waste is being managed in a way that is environmentally conscious. It's a lot of since the vsquig regulations are so much less stringent than the LQG regulations. EPA decided to allow vsquigs to send their waste to an LQG, knowing that the LQG would manage the waste in a responsible manner and make sure that it was sent to the proper disposal facility. It's effectively to help it could help with costs for management of hazardous waste, and also just to make sure that it's managed well.
The next question is about episodic events. They ask, can the 8700-12 form be used in lieu of a TCEQ form 20940 for episodic events?
That is an option. I will just note that the TCEQ 20940 form is a 2-page form, and the EPA 8712 is a 6-page form. So I would think it would be easier and easier to use the TCEQ version of the form, but we would not reject a notification submitted for a registered generator on an 8712. We would reject a notification for an unregistered generator on the 8712 because the 8712 doesn't have some of the required information that we need for unregistered generators.
Okay, and if you generate oil and gas hazardous waste, does that fall under RRC jurisdiction or TCEQ? Do you comply with RRC one-time shipment or TCEQ episodic events?
If the waste was generated as the result of the production of oil or natural gas, it falls under Railroad Commission and is subject to Railroad Commission requirements and regulations. So assuming that it's a waste from the production of oil and natural gas, yes, you would need to talk to Railroad Commission. Wastes that are not the result of production of oil and natural gas fall under TCEQ's jurisdiction and would therefore require notification under the TCEQ requirements.
Okay, and does the LQG need to be related to the vsquig, or can the vsquig send waste to any LQG?
It has to be the same person, so under the control of the same, basically CN is what we're looking at as far as TCEQ is concerned. So you couldn't send it to, a subsidiary that had a different CN or, basically, yeah, we're going to be looking at, do the companies have the same, CN number when looking at vsquig consolidation.
Okay, and when will the generation status change on the NOR form? Oh, sorry, on the NOR from conditionally exempt small quantity generator to very small quantity generator?
I don't have an answer for that. It's a ticket that has to be worked, and it's not a high priority ticket since they're considered kind of equivalent terminology. So I doubt it'll change anytime soon.
Okay, and that wraps up the questions for now. So Kristen, whenever you're ready, we can go on to the next part.
All right, sounds good. All right, so now we're going to talk about the part of the generator improvement rule that is mandatory, that has the mandatory requirements that are not conditional or optional. All right, so for small quantity generators and large quantity generators, in the old rules, those facilities had to label containers with the accumulation start date and the words hazardous waste. Now, under these new rules, we are adding additional labeling requirements. So on-site containers and tank labels must indicate the hazards of the contents. So facilities have the flexibility on how they want to indicate the hazards of the contents. They can use already established methods like the hazard communication hazard, or I guess the hazard communication labeling that's consistent with Department of Transportation requirements, or they can use hazard statement or pictogram that's consistent with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration hazard communication standards, or they can use a chemical hazard label that's consistent with the National Fire Protection Association. But it's up to the generator how they want to communicate those hazards. It just has to be labeled on the container or tank. For drip pads and containment buildings, facilities can just keep the label of the hazards near the accumulation units. It doesn't have to be on the units. So the labeling of the hazards is in the same part of the rule as the accumulation start date and the labeling requirements to have the words hazardous waste. So they need to be labeled, containers need to be labeled with the hazards at the point of generation, just like you have to do for the accumulation start date and the words hazardous waste. Okay, so the other labeling requirement is before shipping the waste off-site, generators must mark their containers with the waste codes. That's those codes that tell you why a waste is hazardous and what it's hazardous for. So, for example, like D003 is a waste code for waste that's reactive. So it's those codes that start with a letter, either D, P, U, K, or F, and then it's followed by 3 digits, showing what the waste is hazardous for. So facilities can use a barcoding system if the RIC or waste codes are tied to that specific container. So this requirement, they have to just be placed on the container before shipping the waste offsite, which is different from the requirement we talked about on the previous slide where it needs to be on the container at the point of generation. So the reasoning for this rule is it allows the receiving treatment, storage, and disposal facility, or TSDF, to know how to treat the waste in order to meet land disposal restriction requirements. All right, so we're going to go through a couple of example labels that will meet the new labeling requirements. So we are showing examples of what the label should look like before it is shipped offsite. So this example label indicates the hazard of the waste by stating flammable waste. It shows the accumulation start date and the words hazardous waste, which were already requirements for small quantities and large quantities. Now the label also shows the waste code D001 because this example is showing a container that's about to be shipped off-site. All right, so the next example, this one uses the words of the applicable hazardous waste characteristic by stating toxic for chromium, and then it also has the hazard code for chromium, D007. This last example uses the OSHA hazard communication oxidizer pictogram, and then has the hazard code D003 for reactivity. All right, so for satellite accumulation areas, some of the new requirements are that hazardous waste cannot be mixed or placed in a container with other hazardous waste that are incompatible. The new rules allow for containers to remain open temporarily under limited circumstances, which includes if it's necessary for the proper operation of equipment, you can have temporary venting of a container or have it open, or if you need to have, in order to prevent a dangerous situation, such as the buildup of extreme pressure, you can have it temporarily open. The rules also clarify and provide a maximum weight in addition to volume for acute hazardous waste allowed in a satellite accumulation area. The rules also clarify existing guidance about what 3 days means. So for satellite accumulation areas, once you have exceeded the amount allowed in a satellite accumulation area, you have 3 consecutive calendar days to move the waste to the container storage area or central accumulation area. So now the rules clarify that. And then the rules also incorporate standards that were already in place for centralized or central accumulation areas and now apply them to satellite accumulation areas, such as the container compatibility, the labeling, and contingency plan requirements. All right, the final rule requires small quantity generators to re-notify every 4 years. So this was part of the EPA rule, and it was put in place because we want to have a clear picture of the small quantity generator universe since it does fluctuate. So EPA wanted a way to get inactive facilities off their universe list. Since in TCEQ we do an annual waste summary that includes some kind of certification of your status or your generator status, that's going to count as this re-notification requirement. All right, so the new rules allow for small quantity generators to accumulate hazardous waste on drip pads and in containment buildings if they choose. Okay, so both small quantity generators and large quantity generators have been required in the past to make arrangements with local emergency responders. These arrangements include familiarizing the local responders with the layout of the facility, the properties of the hazardous waste on site, and possible evacuation routes. So generators have always had to document if they were unable to make those arrangements, but now they must keep documentation that they attempted to make those arrangements. There's no specific form required to meet this requirement. All right, so there's a new requirement for a quick reference guide. This requirement came about because facilities' contingency plans could be up to 30 pages long, and in an emergency, that's a lot of information to sift through. When you're in an emergency and you can't spend all your time trying to find the relevant information. So this requirement came about to have a shorter, easier to read guide in the case of an emergency. So new large quantity generators are required to submit a quick reference guide of their contingency plan to all local emergency providers. Existing large quantity generators are required to prepare and submit the quick reference guide when they update their contingency plan for any reason. So if you have a new emergency coordinator, like the old person quit, you have a new contact, and you're updating the contingency plan to reflect that, then you need to develop a quick reference guide and submit it to the local emergency providers if you're an existing large quantity generator. All right, so this quick reference guide is not required to be submitted to the TCEQ. However, if you are investigated, the investigator is going to want to look at it, so it needs to be available on site. The quick reference guide, while not submitted to the TCEQ, does need to be submitted to all local emergency responders. All right, so the quick reference guide needs to include the names and types of hazardous waste, the maximum quantities of hazardous waste. You need to identify waste that requires special medical treatment and include a list of emergency coordinators. It needs to include a facility map, which shows where hazardous waste are generated, accumulated, and stored, and routes for accessing those wastes. And then you also need a street map that shows your facility in relationship to nearby schools and residencies. needs to include information on your on-site notification system, and then information on the location of the water supply. All right, so closure is the process of removing a waste management unit or closing an entire facility, either when a facility moves locations or goes out of business. So closure is the process of ensuring that no waste has contaminated the environment, and if there has been contamination, that it's remediated. So this includes submitting documentation to TCEQ about your investigation to see if there's been any contamination on site from a waste management unit when you're closing it. And then TCEQ going through the administrative process of inactivating that waste management unit on your notice of registration and closing it out. Or if you're closing the whole facility, closing your solid waste registration out. So this has always been a requirement for industrial and hazardous waste facilities, but now there are some time limits and notification requirements. So you need to notify TCEQ no later than 30 days prior to closing a facility. And you need to notify TCEQ within 90 days after closing the facility that you complied with any closure performance standards. So LQGs can request an extension no later than 75 days after closure. They need more time. So if you are closing a unit, but not the whole facility, you need to maintain information on the closed units as part of the operating record and have those records be kept on site and readily available. All right, so that was everything in the generator improvement rule package that's new. And so now we're going to talk about the rest of the phase 2 RCRA rule package. All right, so aerosol cans have now been added as a type of universal waste that facilities can take advantage of. So there's a lot of benefits of universal waste. There's no manifest is required when transporting universal waste. The waste does not count towards your generator status, your hazardous waste generator status. You can accumulate the waste for up to 1 year from the start of generation. And then the waste is exempt from any annual fees. So we already have other types of universal waste like batteries and paint related. And so now we're just adding aerosol cans as another type of universal waste. And there's the definition of aerosol cans in the rules if you have any questions about whether a certain type of waste you generate would meet or could be managed under the aerosol can universal waste provision. All right, so the phase 2 RCRA rule package also includes some revisions to the definition of solid waste. It eliminates the 2015 verified recycler exclusion and reinstates the 2008 transfer-based exclusion. It removes the definition of legitimate recycling and reinstates the 2008 factor 4, which must be considered but is not a requirement for legitimacy. The phase 2 RCRA rule package also includes the pharmaceutical waste rule for pharmaceutical waste at healthcare facilities. So this rule has alternatives, like a different way of managing hazardous pharmaceutical waste at healthcare facilities that better fits those types of facilities instead of having them operate under the general hazardous waste rules that really didn't fit a healthcare setting. So healthcare facilities cannot discharge hazardous waste pharmaceuticals through the sewer, and that has been in effect for a while. The other thing that, so something that applies to all facilities, not just healthcare facilities, is Over-the-counter nicotine replacement therapies will now no longer be part of the definition of P075 acute waste. However, nicotine, like liquid nicotine, such as e-cigarettes, still will meet the definition of P075 acute waste. So it just things like patches, cigarette or nicotine patches will no longer be considered acute hazardous waste. All right, so there were some changes to Subpart K, which is an alternative generator requirement for teaching and research laboratories. It allows for a longer accumulation time, so now 12 months instead of 6 months. There are also some fees that are associated with electronic and paper manifests that were included in the RCRA rule package, the phase 2 rule package. And then the foundry sand, so it allows for an exclusion from the definition of solid waste for spent foundry sands that are generated by the iron and steel casting industries when they are appropriately recycled. All right, so we have another break for questions, so feel free to include any questions you have in the chat and we'll answer them.
At the moment, we have a few questions, so I'll go ahead and start reading those out if anybody thinks of any more. First question is, if you use a daily accumulation container, DayCan, that is emptied to a SAA at the end of the shift, does it have to have the same labeling requirements? Martin, I know you're working on this. Did you want to read it aloud or did you want to just answer it in the chat?
Let me see. Yeah, I can just put it in the chat.
Okay, no problem. I'll go ahead and go to the next question then.
I'm still looking it up. I apologize for that.
Oh, no problem. Take your time. Next question is, would inactivating a WMU on a site's NOR qualify as notifying TCEQ?
I would, this is Andy, I would need clarification about what they mean by notifying TCEQ. If they're talking about notifying TCEQ of closure, I would say no. We have different requirements for closure notifications. There's a page on TCEQ's website that outlines the requirements for unit closure. It includes a closure report and, you know, various components of that report. Inactivation, as far as TCEQ is concerned, just means it's temporarily kind of out of service. It could be put back into service, so we don't consider that notification of closure.
Thank you, Andy. The next question is, can we obtain a copy of this presentation for reference? The answer to that is there is slides that are posted in the Q&A. I can post that link again since it's probably kind of lost with all the questions that have been posted. There is also a previous recording that has been posted on one of our TCEQ web pages, and I can also link that into your question. And the next question asks, any specific wording or specific phrase that needs to be on the universal waste aerosol can labels?
I think if you this is Martin, if you are managing it as universal waste, then it's universal waste, so it doesn't need the hazardous waste labeling requirements. So I guess labeling it as universal waste, aerosol cans. So I don't think there's specific labels. It just has to be clearly marked as universal waste. I think you're thinking if maybe it could not be universal waste, then it would meet the hazardous waste labeling requirements.
Okay, thank you, Martin. At the time, we don't have any other questions, Kristen. So at this time, it's 2:22, so we'll take a quick 10-minute break and be back at 2:32. Everyone enjoy your break. Hello, everyone, and welcome back from the break. At this time, we have one question that came in during the break, but I'll go ahead and read it aloud and I'll go ahead and answer it. They asked if a recording will be of the presentation will be emailed to you. It will not be emailed, but we do have a previous recording of this webinar posted on the TCEQ website, so I can go ahead and link that to you, and I'll also put it in the published Q&A so everyone can see it and see that link as well. And with that being said, Kristen, there are no more questions, so go ahead and take it away.
All right, sounds good. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got to this point with these rules, these new rules being in place. So we're going to talk a little bit about the rule adoption process. So there's multiple steps to the rulemaking process. The first is pending rule proposals. That's the first step. These are pending proposals that staff recommend that have been filed with the chief clerk, but they have not yet been voted on by the commissioners. So this is the first stage in the rulemaking process. The second stage is the proposal stage, where the rules are brought to the commissioners at our agenda and the commissioners approve of them, and then they're published in the Texas Register for public comment. And then pending adoptions are staff recommendations kind of based on those public comments that are then filed with the chief clerk. If there's any changes, they're filed with the chief clerk. And then the last stage, the rule adoption stage, is where the rules are adopted by the commissioners. They approve of it at agenda, and then they're published as final in the Texas Register. So for this phase 2 RCRA rule project, the official rule project number is listed there. This rule project was brought to the commissioners at agenda on January 12th, and it was approved. And then the effective date of this rule package was February 3rd, 2022. You can find the new rule language on our website. We have a rule page that's dedicated to what's new in TCEQ rules. You can view a copy of the current rules, and then you can also track rule projects as they go through that process I was just talking about. It'll show you what stage a rule project's in and any upcoming dates where it would be going to agenda. So it's a really helpful website. And this is this website, covers all rules, air, water, and waste. So if there's any rule projects you're interested in tracking, this is a great website to view and keep track of all of those rule projects. Another way to keep track of rule projects is to sign up for our email updates. That's our Gov delivery service. So you can go to our website and sign up to receive email updates about, you can choose, just certain topics you want to receive updates about. We really aren't, out there to spam your mailbox or anything. We send them out just as necessary and don't send out too many emails. But if you want to select which topics you want to receive rules about, there's that option. It's a great way to learn about webinars like this one and new rule proposals. I will also say we do have our trade fair coming up in Austin. That'll be May 10th through 11th. You can sign up to attend the trade fair on our website. The attendee registration has opened up, and we will be doing trainings during trade fair on hazardous waste topics, including we'll do a training on the pharmaceutical rules. So if you're interested in that, feel free to sign up on our website. So some other resources we have on the Phase 2 RICA Rule project include our compliance resources website, which has information for the common generator for small quantities and large quantities. We have information about what rules apply and how to comply. We also have a website on episodic generation. And then we have a website about the very small quantity generator to LQG consolidation as well. And then we also have a website about the hazardous waste pharmaceutical management and how to make sure your registrations are all updated if you're a healthcare facility who's going to operate under those rules. And you can find the links to all these rules in the PowerPoint slide link that Stephanie has provided. Also some EPA resources as well. We have the EPA has a website on the generator improvement rule, which includes a really helpful frequently asked questions page where they have some frequent questions and the EPA answers on those questions. There's also a fact sheet and a crosswalk from the old citations to new citations for the EPA rules. Okay, did we have any questions come in about this part of the presentation, or, if you have any questions about the rule adoption process or the resources we have, feel free to type those into the chat and we can take a second to answer those.
We did have one question come in. It was about aerosol cans. The question is, if the aerosol can contains the hazardous waste and goes through a can puncture system to recycle the can, and then the residual is accumulated in a drum, can the waste still be managed under universal waste?
This is Martin. Only if it's pain and pain related waste. Because only because the pain and pain related waste is itself universal waste. If it's not one of the universal waste, then you'd have to classify the waste. And if it turned out to be, hazardous, you'd have to manage it as hazardous.
For clarification, this is Sarah Schreier. For clarification, there are some very specific conditions in the rule under which universal waste aerosol cans can be punctured. But in general, they shouldn't be if you're going to manage them as universal waste.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And that mostly has to do with damaged cans, if they get damaged while they're being stored.
Okay, thank you, you two. And then it looks like all the other questions have been answered. So, Kristen, we're good to go ahead to the next part.
All right, sounds good. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the program that I work for, Small Business and Local Government Assistance. So this is a TCEQ program where we offer one-on-one assistance. We help customers understand the requirements that it could apply to their facility or help walk them through a form. The assistance that Small Business and Local Government Assistance provides is confidential and without the threat of enforcement. So it's a great resource. So our customers include small businesses, also local governments, and we work with other associations and agencies as well. So we do have a formal definition of small business, which applies to our Environmentor program, which I'll talk about later. But if you are bigger than this definition of a small business and you just have a question that you need help with or something like that, feel free to call us. It's just for our Environmentor program, you do have to meet this formal definition of a facility with 100 or fewer employees across all locations. Same thing goes for the definition of small local government. Does apply to our Environmentor program. If you just want to call us and ask us a question and you're bigger than this, then feel free to do that. That's totally fine. So that's a city of 50,000 or fewer, or a county of 100,000 or fewer. That's the definition of a small local government, which comes into play with our Environmentor program. So we have a lot of ways that we reach customers and that customers can reach us, and we're going to go through those. All right, so we have a hotline number, which one of our small business staff mans from 8 to 5 any day that the agency is open. We take a break for lunch, but other than that, you can call this number and talk with a small business staff member, and we'll help you with your question. It's a toll-free number as well. We also have a website, the texasenvirohelp.org. That's where you can find like our industrial and hazardous waste compliance resources webpage. We have web pages based on the type of business you are as well, what industry you're in, and all the different air, water, and waste requirements that could apply. And then we also can do office visits where you come to our office. Maybe we help walk you through a form face-to-face, or a site visit where we would come out to your site. So our Environmentor program, this is one that I was talking about where you do have to meet the definition of a small business or small local government. And it's where if you need some really technical assistance, like you need someone to fill out a form for you, you don't have the ability to do that yourself. This program has volunteer professionals like consultants or engineers who volunteer their time to help you do that technical assistance. So if you're receiving help from small business, we can help you kind of determine if an Environmentor would be a good fit. On the flip side, if you are a consultant or an engineer and you would like to volunteer as an Environmentor, you can send an email to our program, the Texas EnviroHelp at tceq.texas.gov, and we can go over the how to apply to become an Environmentor and help small businesses who need really technical assistance. So we have small business staff available throughout the state. We have someone in almost every region. For the Midland region, we just have people in our Lubbock office cover that area, but otherwise we have a small business staff member in each of the TCEQ regional offices. And you can find a list of your local small business person on our website. We also have a rural ombudsman. He does a lot more work with water and wastewater systems, but he helps local governments. He's kind of acts as a liaison between the TCEQ and those local governments. He does a lot of outreach and webinars and events for local governments as well. And our rural ombudsman is Jason Robinson, and his number is listed there. Like I mentioned before, we have our Gov Delivery email list where you can sign up to receive email updates from TCEQ. And if you only want to receive updates about certain topics, you can select which topics you'd like to receive information on. We also have our advocate newsletter where we send out articles about new rules or upcoming events. So feel free, you can sign up for that as well when you sign up for the Gov Delivery emails. All right, and once again, the contact information for small business. If you want to reach us, you can call us at our hotline, or you can email our email box, the Texas EnviroHelp box. So I guess right now we can see if we have any additional questions.
There is one question. Martin, I see that you are replying to it. Would you like me to read it aloud, or were you gonna just answer it in the chat?
I can answer in the chat. I was just gonna say you can send those questions about the foundry sands to our IHWPR box. So I'll put the complete address in the chat.
Okay, perfect. At this time, we don't have any other questions. If you do have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat while we're waiting to see if any come in. I would like to mention that we have a survey that you can complete to let us know how we did in today's webinar. I just posted that link again, so it should be the newest link that was just posted by me. So I'll give it about a minute and see if any other questions come in. And Martin, were you able to get an answer for that daily cans question?
Yeah, I thought I was having trouble pasting it. So hold on. Pasted it.
I published
What I
it.
was saying, you gotta mark the universal waste and label the container. Either the container where all the aerosol cans in needs to say universal waste, or the actual individual items need to be labeled as universal waste. Let me try to paste it again. I think I pasted it, and I don't know if I hit dismiss or publish. I might have.
Martin, it's in the published answers.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just put it again for this question for this phone caller. It's not a problem.
Okay, and no other questions have come in, so I would like to thank everyone for attending today's IHW Waste Rule Update webinar. If you haven't yet, please complete that survey that is linked in the chat. If we didn't answer your questions today, or if you think of more, please email us at ihwper@tceq.texas.gov. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you for attending.